That night the city slept, shrouded in silence and thick fog. CCTV cameras caught only the reflections of street lamps and the occasional passing car. No one suspected that beneath the surface of calm, one of the most daring plans in the city's history was brewing. He entered the bank not with a gun, not in a mask, but in an electrician's suit. He calmly walked through the back door, using forged documents and pre-prepared key cards. The security guards had already been neutralized, not by force but with money. Each of them received 10,000 euros for their silence. The guards decided that it was better to live with a bribe than to die for their principle. The main plan began in the server room. There was a control unit for digital locks, alarms, and video surveillance. In a matter of minutes, he introduced a virus that blocked all alarm signals. On the operator's screens, everything continued to look as usual. Silence, emptiness, order. Outside, there was a black van converted into a mobile workshop. Inside, there were three partners. One was monitoring digital channels, the second was managing radio interference, and the third was preparing to crack the safe. Everyone knew their business. No one asked unnecessary questions. They were bound not by trust but by iron discipline and fear of the leader, the same man who was now alone inside. He walked through the corridors as if he knew every turn by heart, and this was not far from the truth. For a year he worked undercover, as a cleaner, a courier, a repairman. He studied the building thoroughly. He made a map, listened to the employees, found weak points in the system. The safe was in the underground level, surrounded by several layers of protection. One wrong step, and it would all be over. But he was precise. His fingers slid over sensors, entered codes, bypassed traps. The system was complex, but the man was smarter. 20 minutes later, the safe doors began to open, revealing metal shelves with neatly stacked bundles of banknotes. 1 million euros. Clean, unmarked, without censors, delivered just the day before. The money was intended for a major deal between two international structures. The delivery was planned for the next day, but they would not survive until the next day. He put the bills in prepared bags, marked and vacuum-packed. It all took no more than 8 minutes. At that moment, a second car drove up to the exit, a white pickup with a trailer. The driver, a woman in her 40s, looked like a random passerby, but she was a former military woman with a cold look and unshakable self-control. The bags were transferred to the trailer. Then, disappearance. The car drove away not along the main road, but through an industrial zone where the cameras had not worked for a long time. Each route was calculated, each turn tracked and tested in advance. And he himself, he stayed. He returned to the security room and planted a device that erased records for the last 48 hours. Then he left through the main entrance, leaving the access card under the mat. He walked slowly without turning around. In his hands was a folder with reports, not a shadow of excitement on his face. In the morning, the police discovered the disappearance of the money. The cameras did not record anything. The sensors did not work. Not a single witness. The security claimed that everything was calm. It was impossible to prove otherwise. An investigation began. Experts from the center arrived. They rechecked the security system, interrogated the employees, but each had an alibi recorded on video. No signs of hacking. The only thing they noticed was the strange disappearance of one cleaner who quit a week before the incident. The name was fake. The documents were fake. There were no traces. Meanwhile, he was already in another country. He changed his appearance, got a new passport, invested part of the money in offshore accounts. The rest in real estate, gold, cryptocurrency. He didn't spend money thoughtlessly. He built the future. The police never found a trace. Neither the bank nor the security experts were able to restore the lost data. The insurance company paid compensation. The bank hushed up the scandal. A year later, everything was forgotten. And he lived, not as a fugitive, as a man who proved that the perfect crime is possible. The main thing is a cool mind, iron discipline, and a complete lack of regret. Sometimes he went into banks, not to rob. He just looked at the security, the cameras, the customers, and he thought, if I could do it once, I can do it again. He disappeared from the radar as if he had vanished. No transactions, no phone signals, no border crossings with genuine documents. But the disappearance was not an escape. It was part of a plan. He settled in South America under an assumed name, settling in a house on the outskirts of a coastal town where no one asks questions if you pay in cash. He had a routine. He woke up at dawn, drank strong coffee, and spent hours reading newspapers in 3 languages. Then he went for a run along the ocean. He didn't just relax, he observed. He followed world markets, politics, rumors. He knew money is not an end. It is a tool. The real end is power, not the kind in government offices, but power over time, over people, over fear. But the calm did not last long. 2 years after the robbery, a new department was created at Europol, specializing in crimes without a trace. They began by studying the case of $1 million disappearance from a bank. A young analyst noticed a strange pattern. The same man had appeared on cameras at 5 different banks over the past 7 years, always in the background. A courier, an installer, a client. His face was slightly different. Lenses, a beard, scars. But his movements, his gait, his facial expressions gave him away more than his eyes. They started hunting. Meanwhile, he felt it. It had been quiet for too long, and he started preparing. He bought himself a second home, this time in Southeast Asia. He began communicating with people he would not have let near before: drug dealers, smugglers, illegal brokers. He was building a network in which he himself was becoming a legend. The investigators got to the former security guard, the same woman driver. She lived in retirement in Poland under a different name. They found her through a blind spot, medical records after an accident. She was arrested. She was silent for 3 days, then she agreed to talk. But on one condition: no recording, no witnesses. She said he didn't just want to steal. He wanted to prove that the system was rotting. That fear of authority was an illusion. He considered himself a surgeon and the bank a tumor. These words became headlines. The story resurfaced. Newspapers wrote, "The Phantom Thief, Genius, Avenger, or Criminal." The police closed more than 20 cases, linking them into a single line. They began to call him the Black Watchman because all the thefts occurred at exactly 3 o'clock. He knew time was running out. One morning he woke up, turned on the TV, and saw his face, a composite of archive footage enhanced by recognition algorithms. They were looking for him. A reward was put on his head, €1 million, ironically, the same amount he had once stolen. He was not afraid. He smiled. He stood up, took out his suitcase, and turned on the timer. On the screen, 72 hours. That's how long it took him to disappear again. He didn't escape. He overplayed. 3 days later, the news spread around the world. The Central Bank of Geneva was attacked. 4 million Swiss francs disappeared. No cameras, no sounds, no trace. And again, 3 o'clock. This time it was no longer just a robbery, it was a message. He was not a homeless person. He was not a millionaire. He was an idea. He became a shadow living in the fears of bankers and in the dreams of those who believe that the system can be broken from within. And every time money disappears, without a trace, someone whispers, "He's back." Do you want me to add an ending with his capture or a new twist? 2 years have passed since Zero disappeared, but its shadow still haunts Europe. Everyone remembers that night when the systems crashed so much that people thought their world had collapsed. But in fact, it was just a prelude to a bigger plan. When Zero left, many thought it was the end. But the hidden network continued to operate in the shadows. It did not lose its influence. On the contrary, it became more sophisticated, more dangerous. Soon, new attacks began. Only now they were much more covert. Banking systems were susceptible to cyber attacks, and bank cards were counterfeited. But it was not about money. It was much more complicated. The idea of Zero was not just chaos and destruction. The main goal was to break people's trust in the system. The banking system, which once seemed unbreakable, began to crumble before our eyes. People didn't even trust their own accounts, not knowing how much their money was at risk. While Europe was in shock, in London, the most influential financial leaders were still discussing the aftermath of the crisis at a closed meeting. They knew that Zero was using a methodology based on the analysis of human behavior. In search of answers on how to stop the shadow network, they began working with professional hackers and undercover agents. However, cracks began to appear within their own structure. A viral data leak caused the company, once a symbol of stability, to crumble like sand through your fingers. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, in Paris, a new player had emerged. A young woman known by the pseudonym Luce attracted attention after three of her companies, which provide security solutions for businesses, were hacked and used in cyber attacks. It soon became clear that she was not just a victim. She was part of the same shadow world that the world's governments were fighting against. She was a skilled psychologist and strategist, able to predict the enemy's next move, knowing exactly how they would act. Luce was ready to use her abilities to restore order to the world, but her goals were still ambiguous. She was ready to create more than just a new system. Her ambitions went further. She wanted to become a new foundation for the world where she could control the future. Meanwhile, Detective Arthur Burns, who had been trying to figure out the Zero case all this time, was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He no longer believed in the laws. Faith in the system collapsed when he witnessed how one of the world's leading corporations, with the support of governments, hid the facts about the real motives for cyber attacks from governments. He had a feeling that all this was part of a much grander plan. One of his last moves was to listen in on a conference call between several world leaders. He was shocked. The contacts included not only high-profile businessmen, but also agents connected to underground groups. Burns realized that the only way to defeat Zero was to tear out the root of the evil that grew in the very depths of the power structures. However, no one could have predicted how dangerous the next events would be. A few weeks after Zero disappeared, his former ally emerged from the shadows, a man known as James Volker, a former army colonel, now one of Europe's leading terrorists. He used his connections and knowledge of military operations to assemble an army of mercenaries ready to operate around the world, carrying out Zero's orders. There was no place for the weak in this new world. He was armed from the start. Every step he took was thought out to the smallest detail. He knew that his goals were to destroy the old hierarchies of power, to destroy the concept of law and order that had been built over centuries. But he was not just a destroyer. He was also a builder. He was creating a new system, much more brutal and efficient. Within months, arrests and disappearances became the norm. Many world leaders lost their positions, and some went into the deep shadows, hiding from their former allies. Meanwhile, Detective Burns' investigations led him to a strange, empty villa on the outskirts of Rome. This place was his last place of work, when he was led there by the search for Louis Luce. He knew that there was much more hidden here than just the traces left by the Zero group. In this villa, he found another message from Luce. On the wall was written, "We are not just destroyers, we are creators." At this time, a new wave of attacks began, and the world system began to collapse. Burns could not understand who was behind all this, but he knew for sure that this network was not just an organization. It was a virus that penetrated the very foundation of the global order. The next moment, his gaze fell on the monitor, where the latest information was displayed. He was shocked when he realized that Zero was not just a technological threat, but a phenomenon that would turn everything upside down. And the scariest thing is that this group knew how to manipulate not only technology, but also the human mind itself. Time passed. All of Europe was in a panic, but the plan was not yet complete. The technologies they used were just a prelude to the next step. The plans were not finished. Everything was moving towards a grand finale. For example, Paris. Operation Total Failure was on the doorstep. The largest banks were closing, and no one knew what would happen next. The hacked networks could no longer be restored. People could not believe that what was happening was not just an accident, but part of a deliberate strategy. Soon all this became obvious. The lightning-fast network was attacking one country after another. The government tried to take control of the situation, but the confrontation with the dark web was not so easy. The quality of security was insufficient, but this was only the first step.